If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Let me explain. Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hi, I'm Kaylee, a college student and pretend journalist who was conceived with donor sperm in 1999. This is Message in a Bottle. Hey again, or hey for the first time if you're a new listener. Apparently, Message in a Bottle has been listened to in 20 different countries. Yesterday, in an email, a listener wrote, "Thanks for bravely advocating for the rights of the donor conceived." That made me really happy to hear, though I don't think I deserve all the credit. I want the podcast to be a platform for DCP, donors, and receiving parents to share their experiences. And so far, I think we've accomplished that. That listener also told me that I'm not a pretend journalist, but a real one. I agree, I'm not pretending, but I don't know if I've qualified as a real journalist quite yet. Maybe a wannabe journalist. We'll see. Just a reminder to follow the podcast wherever you're listening, follow the show's page on Instagram, you get the idea. The links to everything are in the episode description. This week's episode is a conversation with Danny, a donor-conceived person and co-host of the Best Life podcast. We spoke about how learning this news at age 13 deeply affected her sense of identity, mental health, and her decision to place her daughter for adoption, and more. Danny was kind, vulnerable, and funny. Hopefully you'll find our conversation as eye-opening as I did.
Hey, darling.
Hi.
Oh, hang on a second. Something is not working here. Hang on.
I can see and hear you now. We dealt with some technical issues, and Danny shared some great podcasting advice with me. I've listened to a few episodes of her show, The Best Life, which is linked in the description. Then she began to tell her story.
So I am donor conceived, and I found out when I was 13 years old. My dad, I had just started reading a book. So my birth name is Danielle, and my dad's name is Daniel. So my dad always said I was named after him, but my mom said that I was named after this author named Danielle Steele. She was really popular in the 80s. And she thought it was a pretty name. And so I decided to read a Danielle Steele book. I was 12, 13 years old. And Danielle Steele books are definitely like adult level books, not really for 12, 13-year-olds. And the book that I happened to pick up, it was called Mixed Blessings. And it was about 4 couples. And the couples were all going through different fertility struggles and treatments. And one of them happened to be going through, I think, IVF or something. And it was very new. And I thought this was really fascinating. And so I was telling my dad, basically giving him a book report. He was driving me to gymnastics and he just goes out of nowhere, "You know, I'm not your real dad, right?" And I was like, and
No.
I just remember feeling like myself getting red and just like my heart beating fast. And my first thought was, I'm just like going in my brain going, I know I'm not adopted, because I remember seeing pictures of my mom pregnant with me and like, I'm literally coming out like with the umbilical cord. I mean, there's like all these messy pictures of my birth. And I guess I was too young to even consider an affair or something. I was just confused. I'm like, what is he even talking about? And he said, well, I found out where I had mumps or measles, and I found out that I couldn't have kids. And so your mom and I went to a doctor, and they were doing something that was very new called artificial insemination. And of course, because of this book I just read, now suddenly I knew what that was. And so I was like, oh my God. And I said, okay. And he said, well, we used an anonymous donor. And I was like, and he said, we don't know who it is. And then he just dropped me off at gymnastics. And I'm like, you know, you have this information just unloaded on you and then like, bye. So later he picked me up. We did talk about it on the way home. And then I went to bed and I just couldn't sleep. And so finally I woke up and I ran into my parents' room and I started shaking my mom. And I was like, Mom, is Dad my real dad? And she goes, what? I said, he told me in the car he wasn't my dad. And then she just tells me, go to your room. And then I was like, oh no. Now I'm in trouble. So I waited in my room for probably 20 minutes. And of course, I'm sure this was the ridiculous part, is like, he didn't even tell her. that he told
He
me.
had told you. Yes.
Yeah. So who
Oh my
knows what
God.
the conversation just was. So she comes into my room. She tells me he was never supposed to tell me, that it's all true, that we don't know who the donor is. And then, of course, my next question is, well, what about my brother that I was raised with? And she said, well, we did it with him too. And so I was like, is it the same person? And they just were like, I don't know. And then they told me not to tell him. So basically, it was this instant dump this story onto me. And then I'm not allowed to talk about it for the rest of my life, apparently. So, of course, as a 13-year-old, when you're struggling with identity already, you're already like wondering who you are and where you fit in. This turned into like just this spiral of depression, and also this trying to figure out what kind of person would do this. So my initial thought was I go down this like linear thinking of who would donate sperm. Well, obviously someone who needs money. And who needs money that bad? Of course, a drug addict, because they need money for drugs. So my instant thought was my donor was some homeless junkie who was donating sperm to like shoot up heroin. I mean, This is exactly what I thought. So my self-esteem just plummeted, and I just went through this massive depression. I just remember looking in the mirror crying because I'm like, I don't know why I couldn't figure out who I looked like. And I just went through all of these stories in my head of times where people would say I looked like one of my cousins on my dad's side. I'm like, that's not even true. We're not even related. And wondering, where I got my features and where I got my hair color and my eye color. And it just turned into this mess, which unfortunately, like looking back, I had no outlet for it. I could not talk to anybody about it. And so I was just like internally processing all of this junk. And at the same time, feeling like my biological father was a junkie. And so that somehow means that I'm just worthless and disgusting. And that my birth is like a shame because I'm not supposed to talk about it. So this led into just a lot of, messes as a teenager. And I never talked about it to anyone, and except this one kid. And I don't even remember why I brought it up, but I was about 17. So it was a couple years later. And I don't remember the conversation. All I do remember was telling him that I came from a sperm donor. And he goes, oh my God, that's so cool. And I was like, what are you talking about? It's so gross. He goes, no way, man. You know that you have to be like the smartest and have the best IQ. And they really like look for the best people to donate. And that was a big shift for me because I was thinking, junkie addicted to heroin. And now this guy's telling me, no, they only pick the best people. And as I started to think back to my elementary school years, I was in gifted education classes and I was a lot smarter than my parents. And I was going, whoa, okay, maybe my dad's like a doctor. And I had heard they use medical students. So I'm like, okay, maybe that's a different story. And so ultimately this news really shaped my identity and really my beliefs about who I was.
Yeah.
And it was a roller coaster, and also just one of those things where I kind of put in the back of my mind and tried to not think about, because ultimately I never believed I could find who it was. My parents said there was no information. They didn't have anything written down. There was no pictures. There was nothing. And I just deeply wished, all I really wanted was like to have a photograph and a medical history. And when I was 23, I found out I had a blood disorder, hereditary blood disorder. And this was just through an accidental physical that like I got a new job and I got medical benefits. And so I found out I had this genetic blood disorder. And that's when I really started to freak out a little bit, because I go, what else could I have
that you don't know?
Yeah. And my grandfather died of cancer. And I was like, is there cancer in the family? Is there things I need to know about? And so around this time, these DNA tests started coming out, 23andMe. And someone told me, and at that time, 23andMe was people were using it like to find out medical stuff, which now they kind of they're a little weird about it. Like you can find out if you're likely to get cancer, and they kind of took that stuff down because I don't know, people were freaking out, I guess. But I basically took 23andMe to find out if I was going to get cancer. That was my big fear. And I got the results back and everything seemed fine and normal. And this was in 2013, I want to say.
So what year were you? I mean, I'm not supposed to ask this.
Yeah.
But what year were you born, or like what?
Yeah, I was born in 1981. So I was 13 when I found out. I was like 23 or 24 when I took the DNA test. And then, 23, 24. No, it must have been, 33. I must have been 33 when I finally took the DNA test. And then I was 36. It was 3 years after I took the DNA test when I started to find out about relatives. So it was 2013 that I took the 23andMe. Didn't find out anything about cancer. Everything looked pretty normal. I did see the blood disorder, which I already knew about, that showed up. And for whatever reason, a couple years later, my mom was just sitting there. I was at their house and she goes, you know, what kind of nationality, like how many nationalities are we? I go, I don't know. We're just a bunch of random white people. She
Mm-hmm.
goes, she's like, well, grandma says we have 7 nationalities. I'm like, I don't care. I was like, I don't know why she's bringing this up. She goes, well, I want to know how many. I'm like, well, if you really need to know, I will log into 23andMe and I'll tell you right now. So I logged in
Mm-hmm.
and there was a brand new thing that 23andMe didn't have at the beginning. And it said DNA relatives. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I clicked on it. And then a warning popped up. It said something like, be careful what you see here. I don't know. It was a warning. And I was like, yep, whatever. Clicked it. And instantly I saw a name, like a girl's name, half sister. And then it said anonymous half sister.
Oh,
And
wow.
the same feeling that I got when my dad told
Uh-huh.
me, I was like, oh my God, because I grew up with just a brother. So I'm going, I don't have any sisters. And my mom was sitting right next to me on the computer. And we just kind of like, my dad was over on the TV, so he didn't know what's happening. And we just looked at each other sideways, like, oh my God. And my first thought was, well, these must be the donor's daughters.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even think, and I don't know why, but I guess it's because I was 13 and I hadn't heard of this, but I thought I was like the only person in the world who came from a sperm donor.
Yeah.
So that he must have just donated one time. I was born and then he had his kids and he moved on with his life. So I wasn't sure how to address these girls because I'm like, I don't know if they knew their dad did this, but I
Mm-hmm.
ended up messaging them. And the one who was anonymous messaged me back and she said, I'm from a donor too. So I was like, well, crap, we still don't know who this guy is. And within about 3 or 4 weeks, we connected with a niece, a cousin that the girl and I were both related to, but not related on our other side. So we knew it must have been through the donor. And she messaged us back. She messaged me on my 36th birthday. And she said, I think I know who you're looking for. It's my mom's uncle. And he was donating in the 80s. And she goes, would you like to talk to him? And I was like, oh my God, what do you say to this person? But I just felt it was just this crazy moment of, I never thought this would happen. I never really looked because I didn't think it was possible. Remember that movie with Vince Vaughn, The Milkman,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
everybody knows, right? And I remember watching that movie and crying because I was like, all those kids get to know, and they had a donor number and they could find out. And I didn't have any of that. I didn't have donor number. I didn't have a name. I didn't have a doctor. I had
Oh, I
zero
see.
to go off of.
Because your parents didn't really know either.
They had no idea.
Did they
And
get
they
to pick
didn't
a
choose.
person?
No, they didn't choose. It
Oh,
was just, I'll
wow.
tell you what, it was like a crapshoot in the 80s.
Yeah,
So
that's a lot.
once I finally ended up calling him, I found out things have changed a lot. First off, like that kid who told me that they choose the best high IQ. Maybe they did in the 90s, but they did not when my donor was around. He was just some regular dude. He was short. He was just like, he was not like your top specimen. He was not a doctor. He just worked for the government. He was a single dad trying to make money to raise his boys. And so it was interesting to go back, like the ethics of sperm donation and the ethics of this kind of industry are very, very interesting. Things have changed a lot, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But back then it was kind of like you just got who you got when you showed up.
Yeah.
So I have siblings that I found now, their parents were told they used the same donor on the siblings, and they ended up doing a DNA test and they're not related to each other.
Wow.
And so it wasn't really monitored. My donor said he wasn't tested for HIV. He wasn't tested for anything.
Mm-hmm.
So they were just using these dudes off the street virtually. And he was a good guy. He wasn't a heroin addict, but who knows? They weren't testing that kind of stuff.
Was it fresh or frozen?
It was fresh. So they would call him up and said, hey, we need you to come in, like literally come right now.
Oh my God.
And he would be in one room.
Yeah.
With his whatever, like just how they show in the movies, like, here's your Playboy.
Uh-huh.
And then they'd walk the specimen across the hallway to the mom waiting. And they would even use different donors. So I guess the moms would usually come in twice during their fertility cycle. So like they might come in if they're ovulating, they might come in on Tuesday and Thursday. So they might get 2 different donors Tuesday and Thursday. And then whoever took,
Oh my God.
which is so wild. So finding all this out was shocking. But I have to say the most shocking part was he told me that he donated for 16 years, sometimes 3 times a day.
Oh my God. What?
Yes. Yeah.
Three
So
times a
imagine
day. That by
yes,
itself is just like, what? Who
I
has
know.
the
I was like, did you not have a girlfriend? Obviously.
or something? Like, God. What?
He said he started freezing his own. So he would bring it in. He was like basically storing up so that he could bring it into them if he wasn't ready.
Like
And he would,
professionally frozen or just like
no,
in
he
the
would just stick it
freezer?
in his freezer,
Oh my God.
at his house with his 2 teenage sons. I was
Jesus.
like, good Lord. So this was what was happening back then. There was no regulation. Dude was getting called. And the reason he was doing it that often is he said that there was hardly any donors. So these clinics were calling him. And because he said yes and showed up, he'd go. So he said he never wanted to tell them no. And he ended up donating for 3 different clinics.
Oh
And so it was like this busy part-time side hustle. And I mean, dude probably, and at the time he said first he was making like $20 a specimen up to like 60. And I think now you're probably making 120 or more.
Mhm.
But it was just like this side hustle. He said he wanted to help families and then he was making money and he didn't want to tell them no. And it just sounded like they were really in desperate need for donors. And so he raised his hand and did it. This is what's also wild. My boyfriend looked into it and they take donors now up to age 35 and you have to be like 6 feet tall, 35 and under, like 120 IQ score or something. There's a lot of regulations now.
Yeah.
Well, this donor, my biological dad, I call him sperm dad, he started donating when he was 35 or 34, 35 up until he was 50.
Oh, wow.
So he was like on the upper end. He's only 5'8". I don't know what his IQ is, but he's an average guy. And so just goes to show how much has changed in regulations and things like that. And also just the fact that he was donating so much. I mean, some of my siblings, we found we were going to the same schools and knew each other, and God forbid any of us dated each other and we still don't know.
Yeah, that's like a nightmare I have.
Yeah. I mean, we still don't know because we
Right.
haven't found everyone and we probably never will. But how wild is it that this, small geographical area, you have siblings basically living next door to each other, going to school together, being friends with each other and not knowing you're related because nobody talked about it.
Right. So where did you grow up?
In Walnut Creek, California. So I was born in the Bay Area, Walnut Creek, which is near San Francisco. So he was donating in Oakland, Berkeley, and maybe around San Francisco. Now I happened to actually move and leave and grow up in Las Vegas. So I was kind of away from most of them. But the same thing happened to my brother. He got his donor within Las Vegas. And we found out that one of my brother's half sisters from his donor was my best friend in first grade. And like, we went to church together. So it was happening. It was happening all over where these donors were in one area and just in communities. And so very possible. And I would hate to find out, and I'm sure that it's going to happen at some point where some married couple does a DNA test and they find out they're siblings. And I don't know what you do at that point. I mean, honestly,
yeah, that's like,
you just close the book and you pretend everything never happened. And I don't even know.
Yeah. I feel like I would never look at the person the same. Yeah.
I know. Right. It's so wild. And it's such an interesting, it's cool to be in this Facebook group. When I joined, it was shortly after I found out about the donor, and there was probably 400 people in that Facebook group. And I don't know how many there are now, but I'm going to say there's over 1,500. It's just grown.
Yeah, it's over 2,000, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So it's grown a lot. And we noticed, so when I first found those 2 half siblings, within 5 months, it was just like pop, like new sibling,
so a bunch of people,
a bunch started popping up, and we've had a little bit of a lull. For a while, it was like once a month we were getting a new sibling, and I think we're around up to 28 or so. Wow. But for the last year, we've only had like 3. So it's been slowing down where we're getting less, but it was a little bit wild for a minute. I was like just constantly getting a notification. I'm like, oh, got a new brother. Oh, got a new sister.
Oh my God. Yeah. That's such a weird feeling, and you probably have that same experience. Well, maybe after a while it stops, but I remember finding out about different siblings and getting that kind of like red in the face feeling, or like feeling
Yes.
kind of
Yeah.
freaked out by the whole thing. But yeah, maybe after a while it's just like,
Well,
oh, another one.
what I get freaked out about is I get freaked out for them because a
Uh-huh.
lot of them, because so we were all born between like 78, I want to say in 1992. And the majority of us outside of me, I mean, I found out when I was 13, so I still was not known since I was a baby. I think a lot of kids now, if they're from a donor, their parents tell them right away. And because social media has made it more acceptable, people are posting about their IVF journeys online. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a lot more conversation. But in the 70s and 80s and even early 90s, it was they were told, don't tell your kids.
Right,
There's no
with
reason
stray
they would ever
parents.
know.
Yeah.
Yep. So what's been happening is my poor siblings are 30, 35 years old logging in and they see all these siblings and they're like, oh, there must be a mistake. And then
Mm-hmm.
they go to
That's
their
the thing I
parents.
keep hearing. Yeah.
And then we're messaging them like, oh, your parents didn't tell you. You better go have a
Yeah.
conversation with your mom. And one of our siblings, her mom still lied about it. And so she was going back and forth with us trying to figure it out. And we're like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry,
Like,
but your mom is not telling the truth. So she thought her mom had an affair. And we're like, no, no, no. Your mom did not have an affair. She probably has no idea who this guy is. She's trying to protect you and herself, but she doesn't realize DNA doesn't lie.
uh-huh.
And then finally she broke down and admitted it. But these parents have been lying for 35, 40 years and they're suddenly upset too. They're like, you shouldn't be able to know this. I'm like, well, they didn't have this kind of technology back then. And
Mm-hmm.
so you can't get mad about the anonymity coming out. It just has happened. And so it's really kind of sad and scary because, I went through my own identity crisis at 13 and the same thing happened to my own brother. So the brother that I was told not to tell,
Did you end up telling him?
we did. And he was 33 years old.
Oh, so
And
you
when
waited a long time.
we never told him. And the reason we did was I finally found my donor. And I told my parents, I said, look, I just found the donor. I'm going to start talking about this on social media because I feel like I need to process it and I need to talk about this story. And if you don't tell him within the next 2 weeks, I'm going to tell him. And so we sat him down at dinner and my dad told him that he wasn't his dad and he had to go through his own and he still is, but he's also, and I think what's been cool, and maybe you found this too, is by finding other siblings and finding other people who've had the same or similar story, it's helped process it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, finally being open about it, because I kept it quiet for 23 years, I didn't say anything. And to be able to finally talk about it and kind of get through the shock and also to see people with your same features or things that you didn't know where they
Mm-hmm.
came from before has been really cool. And that's been the blessing of it. And I think my brother, that's been cool too, because he's found other siblings on his dad's side and they've kind of got a little group and community and they've met each other and that's really helped him with his healing. But yeah, I mean, I knew since I was 13, he found out at 33 and he was angry at me too for not
Yeah,
telling
I
him.
was
And
gonna say.
I don't blame him. But I think I also felt like I was between a rock and a hard place as a kid being told not to tell. And so it was
Yeah,
just
that's
such
a
a,
hard position to be in for sure.
yeah. So, and I remember just being so hurt by it that I didn't want him to know to go through what I went through, but I also didn't think that either one of us would ever find out. And so when the DNA test started coming out, I think that helped a ton. To not know and to not have any way to know is so agonizing. It's, I think, worse to know that you're from someone, but not have no way to find out how. And at
Mm-hmm.
least this gives people a way to have some answers.
Yeah, for like emotional, psychological reasons, but then also the practical reasons, like what you were talking about with the medical history.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, one of the first things when my donor's niece said, you want to talk to him, I was like, I guess I don't know what to say, but he was really great in that, some of the first things he said, he just kind of told me his family history, medical history, how old his mom was when she died and how old his dad was and any health history stuff. And I felt very relieved. Like everyone was really healthy and there was no big issues. And that's just something you can't, you you have like this low level anxiety. It's like not in the front of your mind every day. I'm not thinking about it constantly every day. Am I going to get cancer? Do I have a disease? But it's in the back of your mind. And just having that, and you go to a doctor and they ask your health history, you're sitting there with a whole blank sheet going, I have no idea. Is
Mm.
there heart disease? Is there cholesterol? Is there, something that I should know about that I don't? And to have those answers, it just gives you some peace of mind. Yeah.
Huh.
And I think that too, things that are different today. And the reason why people know and talk about it is there's a lot more, same-sex marriages. So obviously
Yeah.
you're going to
Yeah.
know. And so you have more information, where I think this is happening a lot more in heterosexual marriages. And so they were like kind of protecting the dad,
Mm-hmm.
protecting the father. And I think that's also been interesting, where we've had a couple siblings show up, recently, oh, I guess in the last couple of years, who don't want anything to do with us, and they don't want to talk to us because of fear of almost, I guess, hurting their dad's feelings or
Mm-hmm.
rejecting and so, and I get that, but it's also for me, I'm like, I had a conversation with my dad. I told him I went to see the donor and I met some of my siblings, and he goes, "Oh, are you going to go see your real dad now?" And I was like,
Yeah.
I said, "Dad, you're my real dad. Like you're the one who raised me. But I want to be able to have the conversation and tell you about him. This isn't someone replacing you. But for me, it's important for me to know who I am. And it has nothing to do with replacing a family member or making someone feel ashamed for what they could or couldn't do. Like my dad provided for me and he was there, and he was, by all intents and purposes, my father.
Mm-hmm.
This other guy was literally a sperm donor.
Yeah, literally.
He did nothing. He did something very, very easy that he probably would have done without getting paid for anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't take any work for him. And so it's interesting, the family dynamics at play and people's feelings, not hurting family members, and also just the shame and keeping secrets. And that's one thing I wish we could take away. I do have siblings whose parents still want them to keep it a secret because aunts and uncles don't know and grandparents don't know. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel I feel very sad for that, because that's a piece of them that they're not allowed to talk about and share. And I don't think that's fair to put on someone, which is why I totally made my parents finally tell my brother, because I said, I'm right. I need to talk about this now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do feel like people have a right to know the truth about what, like how they got there, like how got here.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. There was so how I told you that I went through a lot of depression and just crap after age 13. I ended up getting pregnant when I was 15, and I placed my daughter for adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And because I had this situation with what I knew about my biological father, I chose her parents. And one of the things I really, really, really wanted to make sure was that she always knew she was adopted. I was like, I don't want her to suddenly wake up at 15 or 13 and be like, oh, guess what? We're not your parents.
Mm-hmm.
And just have all of her that shattered. And we have since reconnected. She's actually the editor of my podcast.
Oh my God.
She is super amazing and just really, really smart and well-rounded. And we've had a lot of conversations about this. And she said, since she always knew, it was just kind of a nothing. It was,
Mm-hmm.
she just
Not
knew
traumatic.
she was adopted.
Yeah.
And I think there's a very similar part of this between adoptees, like in the 70s. And that was kind of the thing, was like, they keep it a secret. They were adopted and they find out their parents aren't their parents. And I've noticed this in the donor conceived group as well. The kids born maybe in the later 90s and up, who always knew, had a very much like, yeah, this is the way it is, versus the ones born in the 70s, 80s and didn't know. To find out from a test, not even from your own parents, even worse. Like I found out from my parents, which is still bad enough at the age, but to find out from a test.
Yeah, it's like stumbling upon. Yeah.
It is just this whole level of just being shaken to your core, because it's not just who you are. It's also the thought of, I've been being lied to my whole life. The people who I trust, the people who were supposed to have my back, had this secret about me. And then it's also that level of shame. Like, why was I a secret? Is there something about me to be ashamed of?
Mm-hmm.
Is there something? And so it's very, very difficult. And so for me, because of how I felt, I knew I didn't want my daughter to have that. And I made sure that she was always going to know from the beginning where she came from. And if she needed to know, if she had any questions, I kept a very detailed journal that I gave to her parents, because I knew I had a million questions that I couldn't answer. And I think when you have access to that, like you did, like if you have questions, I've got this document, or I have a photo, or I have something, then you just feel a lot more confident. And so I think we're getting past this, where this generation is going to, move on and die. And then this is kind of like this interesting time in history where this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to think, like, knock on wood, that it's going to move out and where people aren't going to be keeping secrets anymore. I think it's harder too, between social media and DNA, you just really can't, but it's a very weird thing. And there's not a lot of conversations out there about it. Like, what do you do when your whole life feels like a complete lie, and you look in the mirror and you suddenly, one of my brothers, he found out from the test, and I was the one who had to tell him because his parents didn't. So I
Mm-hmm.
called him on the phone and I said, I'm like, okay, do you know? And he goes, do I know what? And so I was like, okay,
Oh
how am I
God,
going to tell
yeah.
him this? So I started to explain the donor, and it was like, and he's on the phone and I can hear his breathing shift, but you can just hear it click. And he goes, oh my God. He goes, I always wondered why my dad was like 6'8". My uncle's 6'9".
6'8". Oh my God.
Yeah. He goes, my dad's 6'8". My uncle's 6'9". They have like dark curly hair, and I'm 5'8" and short blonde. And I have straight blonde hair. And it was like this instant, like, oh, like it all makes sense. It's like
Mm-hmm.
his whole life just going, why did I get the short gene? My dad and uncles are tall and I've got blonde hair. And like all of those things where you just, not knowing this, you just kind of go, oh, I must have some random, great uncle that's short or something.
Uh-huh.
No, like it just, and you could feel it. And when he said it, I just like felt for him like, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
hate that I had to tell you. And I hate that I'm the one like breaking this news to you. Now you need to go talk to your parents and have them explain. And that's just a wild thing. That's a wild conversation to have to deliver to a stranger. Like, hi, I'm your sister and you don't know
Yeah.
me. And I'm about to blow your mind with some news that you should have been told that you weren't.
Yeah, that's something I guess I'd never even considered having to be the one to explain to someone, because I guess because I was conceived and born like in the late 90s, it's
Yeah.
different. So we know of, like, I think it's 9 different families, 11 or 8 families, 11 kids or something, and
Mm-hmm.
there's only one straight couple. Everybody
Mm.
else is single moms by choice and gay women. And
Yeah.
so I've never had to. And then also my donor is in 23andMe himself. So
Yeah. So he's there.
new people will match and see him and stuff. So he would probably be the one
Be
that
the
they would
one.
message, or that he would have to
Totally.
explain. But yeah, I've reached out to a few different people over time, but I've never thought to do that with the concern that I'm breaking this really kind of scary news to them, because I'm just like, oh well, everyone's a lesbian, so like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
different. Yeah. So but that's actually
For
making me think, if this ever happens again, I'm like, maybe I shouldn't just DM someone on Instagram like, hey, like.
well, for our sibling group, there's only one of our sisters was, her mom was single mom by choice, and that was it. The rest were all heterosexual parents,
Mm-hmm.
and 95% of them were secrets.
Mm.
Um, Probably even closer to 99%. And so every person that comes in, every time we get a new sibling, we're all like, okay.
Who's
And
gonna be the.
we kind of decided a protocol where if they're on 23andMe, one of my sisters will message. And then if they're on Ancestry, I'll message. And we kind of have a very vague message because we're like, we have to feel it out. Like, we don't know if they know. So we just have like kind of a little script and we wait. So if someone pops up, we wait a week to see if they'll reach out first to somebody. And then if they don't, then we have our like representative message them.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to keep it gentle, because if like all, 15 people are messaging like, hey, we're afraid to freak them out. So
Mm-hmm.
we've had to really like create our own protocols and
Yeah.
systems and keep it very, very gentle. And it's been really, really interesting. And now we have like a WhatsApp chat group. And so we're
Mm-hmm.
chatting all the time. We're constantly messaging each other. And we invite the new siblings to the chat group. And some of them have joined right away. Some of them are like, give me some time to process this, and then I'm ready. And some of them are like, just haven't messaged us back and they don't really want anything to do with it. We have a couple that blocked us.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, and I don't know if they're in denial or they just don't want to open that box, but any feeling they have is valid for them. So,
Right.
for me, I wanted to know everything. I'm like, I need to know all of it and I want to meet all of you.
Mm-hmm.
But, everyone's really different. And some people really feel like they need to protect their parents. One of the girls we just had, and this was really crazy. Her parents are both Pakistan. She's raised Muslim. She's devout Muslim. And then she just found on 23andMe, she's half white. Like, our dad's a white dude from Germany.
Right.
And so how shocking is that? Is not only is her culture and that like identity has shifted, and her father has passed away. And so in some ways it's better. And then in some ways it's worse because she doesn't get to ask him questions either. So, and she was like, I was daddy's girl. Like they were best friends. And so there's a lot of grief that comes along with finding out too. The grief of, I had a lot of grief of my dad not being my dad. It made me
Mm-hmm.
really sad. It made me very, very sad that he wasn't, because I loved my dad's side of the family. And in fact, I remember being angry because I'm like, my mom's side is the crazy side. Why do I got to be related to that? Like, and so there's grief, there's sadness, there's a lot of feelings that come up. And I really say that when you find out the news, and this is something I say to the siblings, like, it changes everything and it changes nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And it really does. It changes everything in your brain. It changes your memories. It changes how you think of yourself, but also changes nothing. Like, your parents are your parents. You grew up the
Right.
way you did. And so it's a weird dichotomy and place to be in. But I think after, a couple months in processing, it's kind of like if you lose someone, you have the stages of grief. I think similarly, you go through the stages of grief of denial and anger and depression and bargaining. And then you come out the other side and you realize, like, you start having the acceptance of who you are. But it's a very interesting process. I think that unless you got that thrown onto you later in life, it's hard to understand.
Right. Yeah. Do you know why your dad just spontaneously said that? Like, do you think it was because of the book, or you think it was something he was kind of like maybe had wanted to tell you?
Yeah, I asked him that, and I think the latter. I think he kind of wanted to, and I think potentially too, and I don't know for sure, but I think he and my mom were going through some stuff, and it was almost like a get back at her kind of thing.
Mm.
Like, okay, well, I'm just going to tell. It was probably, I'm sure there were private conversations where he threatened something, and then he just did it. I think it was a little bit out of anger, and then I think the book was like, here's my time,
Uh-huh.
but I think he must have really wanted to for a long time. And that's why it just kind of blurted out the way it did.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I can't
Um,
even imagine. That's such a weird.
I was like, Dad, the way you said it, I'm not your real dad, right?
It's like, no, what? What?
No.
Why would I know
Like,
that?
why? Exactly. I'm like,
Like,
why would I have no clue. Like, nobody's ever said that before. So nope.
yeah.
Yeah, it was very wild. And we've definitely had a lot more conversations since. And I would say that, as uncomfortable as it was finding out the donor and kind of finding these new siblings and bringing this up and telling my brother, it's caused a lot of healing too.
Mm.
It's let us have more open conversations
Yeah, the
and
truth.
have,
Yeah.
yeah, and have and address those insecurities, like my dad being insecure about, is this your real dad now? And for me to be able to say, you're my dad, and like put that to rest of, you're my dad and I love you. And this person is cool. Like, I like him. I'm glad I got to know him, but he's not my dad. And I don't like love him as my father.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's as uncomfortable as it's been. I think it's also been a blessing to me. And unfortunately, some of my siblings haven't had the same,
Yeah.
their parents have still been in denial. They're not allowed to talk about it. They don't want it brought up. And I think that's unfortunate. I think the more we can have conversations, Brene Brown, she's
Mm-hmm.
like a doctor, did a TED talk. She says shame cannot survive being spoken. And I think that's really true. I think the more we can talk about these conversations, the less impact they have on us. And you don't have to live in shame or fear or embarrassment, because it's
Mm-hmm.
just normal. Like, for you, it's just normal. Like, so, and
Right.
I feel sad for the parents who did this in the 80s, and they have like this, they carry around the shame. Like, I used a donor, and these parents in 90s and 2000s are like, yeah, I used a donor, like, big deal. That the whole 80s group didn't have that. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's unfortunate. I think it led to so much, for me personally, depression, suicidal thoughts, anxiety, like mental health issues that I quite honestly didn't need to have. Like, I could have been a
No.
lot more
Yeah.
confident. I could have had a lot less issues. I could have had a lot less hospitalizations and mental breakdowns
Mm-hmm.
had I known, and I think for everyone's mental health, I think it's a great step in the right direction to have these conversations.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
and I hope even just this podcast, maybe people listening who are in my age group or in a similar situation, and finding out later that it doesn't, like, like I said, I still have siblings who are still have that little bit of shame and stigma, who aren't talking about it. And maybe these kind of conversations, listening to them, can help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure. Do you think I don't know how to phrase this, when you found out that you were pregnant and it was after finding out about your dad, did you feel some sense of, like, I don't know how to, I had an unplanned pregnancy earlier in the year, and
Mm-hmm.
I ended up having a miscarriage, but for the like week or 2 weeks that I was aware that I was pregnant, I like
Mm-hmm.
started panicking because I was like, I can't picture myself getting an abortion, not because I don't think people should. I just like have
Mm.
this, it freaked me out, the idea.
Yep.
And I was like, I don't think I can raise a child because I'm
Mm-hmm.
21 and have no idea what I'm doing and I have no money and etc.
Yeah.
And then, but I was like, I should have this baby and give it to like a gay couple to like fulfill my destiny as like a person who like I felt this weird
Mm-hmm.
like circle of charity, like I don't know. So it's interesting what you were saying about wanting your daughter to not have the same experience that you had
Yeah.
by getting all this information. I feel like it is
Yeah.
related.
For sure. I mean, I obviously getting pregnant at 15 was not ideal. I was in a mental institution when I found out. So they do all these tests. And my first thought was, I'm having an abortion. I was like, I'm having an abortion. I'm killing myself anyway. So who cares?
Oh my God.
I was just literally there because I was suicidal. And just through some random kind of conversation, I met this woman who my parents were going to send me to like this eating disorder clinic. And this girl who worked there, she was anorexic, or she had been. She was maybe like 27 at the time. And she had 2 kids. And my parents were talking to the doctors and they had me talk to this chick. And so she was telling me her story. And I just felt really connected to her. And she mentioned that because of her anorexia, she couldn't have kids anymore. And I just blurted out, like, I still don't know where this came from out of my mouth. I just said, I want you to have my baby. And she's like, what? And I'm like, I want you to have my baby. And literally in my brain, I'm like, what are you talking about? I had an abortion scheduled for later that week. And I was like, I left and I called my boyfriend and I was like, I just told this lady I want her to have our baby. And he was like, okay. And so it was kind of crazy. Like, yeah, the whole thing was a very weird place and time to be. And I found out I was having a girl. And then it was about 4 months in, she called me crying and she said, I can't adopt your baby because it has to be a private adoption. It's going to cost $50,000 and we don't have it. And so at that point I was stuck with this, like, okay, now I'm, not going to have an abortion.
Yeah.
I know what I'm having, a little girl. She's big. And now I'm like, do I keep her and raise her? Or what's the other option? I didn't even really think that I was doing adoption. I just thought I was like giving my child to this woman.
Right.
And so,
like a donation. It's like,
yeah,
this weird, yeah,
yes,
it's like fulfilling something.
yes. And so I, of course, actually thought about raising her. And it was just a matter of my home life was just so bad. And I'm like, I can't
and so
keep
young.
her here. Yeah. And I'm like, I can't keep her here. I'd have to drop out of school. My parents are just not, I mean, it just wasn't ideal. I'm like, I can't raise a baby here. And so I went to this like social services. And my biggest thing was, I can't just have, and what I had heard about adoption and this, same thing coming from the 80s and the 70s was women would be sent away to have their babies and you couldn't hold the baby. They take it away, whisk it away. You don't know where they went and just poof, baby's gone. And I'm like, I can't do that. I need to know where she's going. I need to know she's safe. I need to know. And so they said, well, it's different today. We have something called semi-open adoption. Now they have full open adoption. But basically I could choose her parents. I could meet them. They would send me pictures and letters till she was 1, and then pictures and letters once a year till she was 3. And then after that, then no contact. So that was where I had peace to go, okay, I can do this, because I just, again, going through what I went through, not only did I not want her to have to go through that, but myself, I felt like I needed to know that she was okay and that she was taken care of and that she was safe. And so I went through hundreds and hundreds of profiles, just reading letters from parents who wanted to have babies. And it took forever. And I finally picked one. And I think we picked them the day she was due. Thank goodness she was late. Cause I'm like, I don't even have parents for her yet. And I met them and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, what if I meet them and I hate them? Like, she's not going to go. Like, I won't let her go. And they were really great. And I just felt a lot of peace. And I told them then, I said, I need her to know, like, when are you going to tell her she's adopted? And they said, and luckily her mom was also adopted. And she's like, she'll always know, we'll give her this, the books that you gave her. And so it was kind of like this agreement that I felt peace about. And I definitely, and people even told me too, when you have her, don't hold her. You're going to get attached, and I couldn't follow any of those stupid rules. Like, I held her, we had her for about a week because it took about a week before the papers went through out of state and stuff. And so I held her as much as I could and I took lots of pictures and I was so glad I did. And I don't regret any of that because I don't know, the advice they gave to people back then, I think caused a lot more trauma than it
Mm-hmm.
needed to. The advice they gave to my parents to never tell us, the advice they gave to these poor birth moms in the 70s to not look at their babies. And it just caused trauma in the birth parents. It caused trauma in the children. It caused just layers and like generational trauma. And
Mm-hmm.
so I just wanted that to stop. And I hope that I've been able to stop that with her. And I'm so glad that we have a relationship now. And, you know, I just love hearing like stories like yours that you knew all along and you have the access to information because
Mm-hmm.
it's weird. It's just new stuff, you know. There's no playbook for this because it was just not even new technology. I mean, kind of technology, but yeah, kind of new technology. And the DNA testing is definitely new technology that's giving us information about ourselves. And people really deserve the right to know who they are. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important.
Yeah. Did you end up keeping in contact with her parents after she turned 3? Is that how you still know her?
Yeah. So after she turned 3, there was no contact. And it was around, so the internet was, it's not new, but kind of people were getting on it more. And there was no Google, but there was Alta Vista search engine. And by accident, when she was 5, the social service agency called me and they said, "Hey, we have a letter here for you." And they had accidentally had a piece of paper that just had one word on it, and it was their last name. And I knew their first names.
Oh.
So I went to Alta Vista search engine and I typed in their name and I found 7 people with the same names. And I knew she lives in California. That was it. I had their first names and California. So not a whole lot of help. California's a little bit of a big state.
Yeah.
So I searched them. Narrowed it down. There were 7. I narrowed it down to the one I thought it was. And then I sat on that information for about 2 years. And then when she was about 7, I wrote them a letter and I said, "Hey, I've moved out. Here's my email address," like literally my Hotmail address back then. "And if you want to stay in touch, I would love to just keep in touch with you." And about a month later, they replied. And I was like, "I don't want to freak you out. I'm not trying to come into your life and like, you know, come back and like steal your baby or steal your child." And they wrote me back and they said, "Hey, we were a little freaked out at first, but now we're so excited you found us." And then we just basically made an arrangement where they would email me on her birthday and Christmas, which her birthday is in June and Christmas December. So
Mm-hmm.
every 6 months, and just give me updates. So I basically kept in contact with her dad twice a year until she was 18. And then once she was 18, I messaged him for her address because I knew she was going to college. And I asked if I could send her some stuff. And I sent her a bunch of cards and birthday presents,
Mm-hmm.
and then we kind of got in contact after that. And I wasn't sure, you know, I really wanted to kind of leave it in her court whether or not she wanted to have a relationship with me, but I definitely, I mean, I was waiting until her 18th birthday. I'm like, okay, now I can. But
Mm-hmm.
I knew that just like because she turned 18 didn't mean she suddenly wanted to talk to me. And it took about 8 months. I sent her everything. And then about 6 months later, she sent me a letter back. And then it turned out about a month before she turned 19, we were going to be in the same state. And so we ended up meeting, but it was slow. It was slow. And then probably the first year or two, it was just like, it's almost like you're dating. I felt like when you're dating somebody and you don't want to be like too like, I don't want to
Yeah,
text back
yeah.
right away,
Like,
but
yeah.
I want to text, but I don't want to text. So I was kind of like that. I'm like, I don't want to be too aggressive, but I want her to know I'm thinking about her. So I would just kind of send messages here, just, you know, like her Instagram post or something like that. And we slowly kind of built a relationship, and I moved out to LA and she ended up moving back to Southern California. And so, you know, I got to see her a few times and we've just built up a good relationship over the last couple of years, but it was a slow thing. And for me, I definitely wanted it to happen, but I also understood that, I mean, I knew her whole life, but to
Right.
her, I was a stranger. So I had to realize like I needed to step back a little bit and let it be at her own pace and if she wanted that or not.
Yeah. It's kind
And
of
it's,
similar, yeah, to
yeah.
the
And I was going to say my donor has been like that too, you know, like he wasn't my dad. He's not been there.
right.
And we have like a cool relationship. I'll text him off and on. We'll, you know, reach out for holidays and it's cool. And so, you know, it's been a weird parallel because it's almost like I feel similar to her. Like
Mm-hmm.
not that I was adopted, but I think there's a very kind of
It's like
similar
half
feel.
adopted, kind of.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been cool. And I think it's actually helped me understand her a little bit better and vice versa. And actually the funny thing was, is when I found out about my donor, I messaged her. I was like, "How did you meet me the first time? Weren't you so nervous?" Because I'm like, I'm so nervous to talk to him. And she was like, I go, "Man, you were brave." Because I was freaking out to even talk to this guy. And I was like, "Hey, you were only 19 and you met me."
Yeah,
So I thought it was cool.
that is cool. You said in the beginning that you wanted to tell your brother because you wanted to sort of process it through talking about it on social media. And do you
Yeah.
talk about this on your podcast? Like, I don't know. I have to listen to it. I don't know what it's about all that much, you know?
Yeah, no, my podcast is called The Best Life Podcast. And really what it came out of was my best friend and I, our husbands both had affairs, and we like found ourselves single and, starting over life in the middle of our 30s. And so just having shitty things happen in life and then being able to turn around and still make something good out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do share stories like this, it's just like this kind of thing. It could start off bad and then you just make the best of it. But I share the adoption story in the podcast. I think episode 18 and 19, I interviewed her. And so I told the adoption story in one episode and then I had her on the next episode.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't really talk about this one too much on my podcast yet. But on social media, I've kind of posted here and there. I kind of joke around it, calling it like my Jerry Springer life, even though I guess it's more of a Maury Povich, you're not the father thing. But
literally.
but it's just something where I feel like if I want to talk about it, because I have a very public persona, that I just don't want to be constrained and have to feel like I'm protecting people or being quiet,
Right.
But yeah, I have it. And actually I'm going to be starting my own new podcast soon. And I probably will talk about it more because this is more of my story, where the Best Life podcast is my friend and I. And so I don't want it to just be all about me.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll definitely listen.
Yeah. It's a good, we have so many cool episodes. We really talk a lot about communication, hard communication. And I think those kind of having hard conversations. And I think those are great episodes for people who are maybe going through this and don't know how to address their parents or how to address their siblings or how to address family members who don't understand. And I think it's also important to recognize where somebody's at in the process, whether you're adopted or you're donor conceived. Sometimes people say things that are meant to be maybe meant to help, but they don't. Things like, well, it's still your parents, kind of like dismissing your feelings. It's still your parents. They cared about you. And it's like, yes, they are, but also I have a right to feel the way I feel, like that they lied to me or that I want to know who I am. Or so we can tend to be dismissive to people and not understand where they're coming from when we're not in their shoes. And so, there's a lot of episodes in those kind of things on how to be a friend to somebody when they're going through something hard, how to have hard conversations with someone, and how to tell people what you need. Because sometimes people say things and they don't realize they're hurting you. And so how do you have the conversations to say, hey, that really hurt when I felt dismissed, and I just need you to, nod your head, and you might not get this, but this is where I'm at right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely helpful in the context of all of this as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, it was really nice to meet you. I'm really like the conversation and your energy. I don't know.
Thank you. Well, yeah, if you all want to, ask more questions, I'm an open book. So if somebody's listening to this and you're curious or you have questions or something similar, feel free to find me on Instagram. I'm Danny J, DANNY, and then the letter J.com, DOTCOM. And I always love to help people navigate this kind of stuff. It's not always fun, but I think ultimately you can find some really cool things about yourself and just learn a lot more about other people. And I don't know, if you end up with an extra half dozen siblings, I think that's pretty cool too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, darling. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Bye.
Have a good one. Well, that was my conversation with Danny. I hope you enjoyed hearing her story and continue to tune in to hear from more people involved in the world of donor conception. New episodes will come out on Thursdays. If you'd like to be on an episode, send me an email. Okay, thank you all for listening. Bye.